Do webcomics devalue the comic medium? That's the question for tonight. Hey my squids, it's your favorite cephalopod, the prize-winning squid here, back with another video. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. I'm something of an intermediate artist who likes to do illustrations and webcomics, and my webcomic Taliah is up on globalcomics.com, Webtoons, and my website, artbytheprizewinningSquid.com. Like everything, these are just my opinions. I'm not a journalist, so I don't do extensive research and don't send any hate to anybody we talk about tonight. Anyway, from the top, like I said, do webcomics devalue the comic medium? This question actually was posted by Caanan Grall over on Meta Threads, and I messaged him and said, hey man, can I do a video on this question? Because I love the thread, I love the ideas that everybody's talking about. And he said yes. So thank you, Caanan, for that. Caanan is an Eisner-nominated comic creator, created Max Overreacts, created Celador for DC, has a new webcomic called Not on the Quest, which is on Webtoons, and is about a 16-year-old who is plucked from their school, dropped into a fantasy world where they can save it and then return 14 seconds later, 14 years older, which is like the best premise. Go read it. It is freaking awesome. With all that said, we're going to do some speed paints tonight as we talk about this. I'm going to actually have some things up on the screen, some of the responses that came from that thread. We're going to talk about all of that tonight. The speed paint that we're going to do is going to be Xolani Abraham from my webcomic, Taliah. Xolani is a Blade of Oa. She is an assassin, a paladin, and she is after our main character, Leyra Orta. She is one half of the blades that are after her. The other one is Micah Ido, who I did a previous video on. Tonight's video is going to be a character portrait of Xolani and then an action shot of Xolani as well. So let's get over into our actual speed paints. I'm going to pull up, because I have my iPad here, I'm going to pull up some of these things up on the screen so you guys can see it. And then we're going to just talk about all of this. This is like such an interesting conversation and topic for me. So now that the speed paints are on the screen, the question was that Caanan asked was, question for comic artists, do webcomics devalue the comic medium? And so I'll actually read what Caanan said. You can go check this out. It is on Threads, so go check it out. It probably has more responses. It was like 70 when I last looked at it. But he said, we put our comic out there for free expecting to be paid afterwards, which is the dumbest business model ever, especially since it undercuts all other comic artists who are still doing it the usual way, paid first. I've done my fair share of conventions to feel the divide between professional artists and webcomic artists. I've even felt looked down upon by congoers when they learned my comic was a webcomic. Are they just two different worlds that don't overlap much, or is one really harming the other? With all this free content out there, are webcomics devaluing all comics? I struggle with this with every new episode I put out and just want to put it behind a paywall, but will anyone read it? It's a personal choice in the end, but I'd love to hear any thoughts or pros and cons as I weigh up my own options. I really don't want to keep devaluing myself, which is what I feel like I'm doing, and I don't want to add to an industry-wide problem that helps regular people see us as dancing monkeys who must sweat for pocket change. And so I'm going to read, that's completely valid. That is a completely valid feeling, and we'll talk more about the idea behind monetization and trying to get people to read a webcomic. And there's different opinions on how you get people to read things and whether something like a webcomic has value overall. So there's different opinions we have tonight to kind of look at. But I'm going to read what I said on the thread. I said, not at all. I think webcomics can be both an entry point for new readers and a point of return for people to keep up with you and your stories. It can also lead people to purchasing your books if you have physicals so that they can get them signed, and if they're at a con or a comic shop, they're more likely to pick up other physical comics. I have a couple examples that I want to talk about a little bit later, but I want to read some of the responses to the thread that different people had. So actually, before I read the responses, I'm gonna actually start off with one of my good friends, Juice Lee. He writes the Scrap comic, which he is releasing the comics physically first. He has them on websites so you can read them as webcomics, but they are very much a physical comic first. And so Juice said, artistically, no. Monetarily, maybe, but I don't know. I only say monetarily because you can't really profit from making webcomics, but you also have to remember that people reading webcomics weren't going to spend money on something they are getting for free. Kind of, but well, I'll let him finish cooking on here. Even if your webcomic has 50,000 readers, you're still not making much from it. It's really for the love of the game, which I feel like comics overall is that anyway. And he even says that the hope with any comic is to monetize it to some degree, but it's no guarantee. Even with indie books, if you're in the position I'm in, you're likely to never get back what you spent unless the shit blows way the fuck up, right? He's right. Chances are you're not going to get your money back if you're putting any money into your comic. We're all doing it for the love of the game. If we make money, awesome. It is not a guarantee. So would something like webcomics be devaluing it then? I don't know. Let's continue with some of the responses. I did ask my friend Mia Kazina. I've mentioned her multiple times on my streams when I was doing my streams regularly. She is one of my favorite comic creators. Her Road Through University is one of my favorite webcomics. Love her characters. And I can say that we're pretty decent friends, good friends at this point, you know? And so I asked her and she said, no, I don't think so, in the same vein as digital art doesn't devalue traditional art. And I think that's very important. It's just a different way to consume media and experience art. I think for the artists, it's kind of like self-publishing versus traditional publishing. You can't afford it or you want more creative control. No knocks to the people who create traditional comics. It's just there are more avenues. And then she said, you probably just wanted a yes or no. I'm sorry for the essay. And no, I wanted an essay. Well, this is a conversation that I think we all really want to have and we all want to talk about. So I don't even think just a yes or a no suffices. It's funny because I'm going to come to one where it just does say just no. So Dr. Rhetoric on that thread said, last month I published my 1200th daily strip of a webcomic. Some folks love it and some folks hate it. But does it matter, really, whether I get 12 readers, 12,000 readers, or 12 million readers if the only reason I do it is to amuse myself? I will say, and just like Juice said, this is for the love of the game. If you don't love what you're creating, if you are creating something and the only reason is to get eyes from other people, you're not gonna create it. You're not gonna continue creating it. We create these things because we really want to see them ourselves. While I want people to purchase and consume what I'm creating, if nobody does, I am. That's the only thing that matters. Me spending the hours working on it will never equate to somebody reading it. Like, they're gonna speed read through whatever, or they're gonna get 12 pages in and go, this isn't for me, and stop reading it. But I'm still gonna create it regardless of who reads it. And Dr. Rhetoric he has the same thought process I do. He said, comic strips are an art form. Nothing I do can devalue the medium. The medium exists because it offers a chance to share in the human experience in its own peculiar way. I pursue my own path. I cannot control what others decide to value, which is damn good. Swords Comic, which is one of my favorite comics. Literally, I love every time Swords Comic posts. Said that physical comics aren't doing anything that groundbreaking lately that I'm aware of. I will actually get to an example of what I think webtoon comics and webcomic kind of vertical slice comics do that I don't think you can replicate in traditional comics. And it's something I think I've seen it done a couple times after this, but it was this specific comic. I still can't remember what it is, but I'll get to that. Webcomics are still exploring an ever-changing landscape. It's like firing your research and development team because the current project is good enough. We need both, which is correct. Rad Pencils said, I find webcomics are the newsstand of this generation. There's a reason Marvel and DC have titles going to webtoons. Go where the audience is. I'm going to cut in here real quick and say that I just saw Global Comics announce that Marvel is coming to the platform, and DC has been on the platform for a good minute now. So, yeah. There's a ton of comics that are sitting in my library to read, or I've already read, or I just added because I read the physicals and I just wanted to have access elsewhere from DC and their affiliates that have been on Global Comics. So DC understood the assignment. It's good to see that Marvel is also understanding the assignment. The advice I always hear is if you want to make comics professionally, just make comics. So the most accessible and cost-effective way is a webcomic. Just like my web strip or my comics in shops or shows, I'm putting it out there for someone to pick up and read and hope they come back for more. It's a roll of the dice if it happens in either medium. True. So he smiled like a weatherman, said, not in the slightest. And I don't know if they're a creator. I didn't deep dive into, their profile too much. It sounds like they're they're a reader. So if this is just a reader, somebody who doesn't create webcomics, this is a very important perspective, I think, that us as creators need to take. So they said, not in the slightest, webcomic artists are really the backbone of modern comics. They're the reason there is such a large array of comics to choose from and such a vast selection of genres. I will get to that in a second. Webcomics are the main reason I am as much into comics as I am today. So this is something that I noticed. You know, I have a mini squid. Mini squid loves comics, loves graphic novels, but not Marvel, not DC, not superhero, not any of that. Everything that they have consumed was a webcomic first. They bring home a book. It says somewhere inside of it, this is a webcomic on Webtoons, this is a webcomic on Tapas, this is a every single one of these books they bring home, it was a webcomic. And even though they're bringing the book home, the fact remains that somebody told them, I've been reading this webcomic and I see they have a book now, we gotta get the book. And that's always what happens. And so they've been bringing these books home and I've been picking them up, and these things, they are every genre under the sun. There is not a single, like, this is the only type of thing they read. And the art styles are all completely different. You know, there's like noir style, detective style comics that they have. And the art style is like spongy. That's the only way I can describe it. It's a very squishy art style. And I didn't think I'd ever see that, right? One of their favorites is Hooky. So that was a webtoon webcomic. And now there's, I think, 3 books. 2 books I know of. I don't know if the 3rd one's out. But the reason why these are now physical books is because enough people read the webcomic that Webtoons said, hey, let's go ahead and get these published. Or the person who created them said, let's publish these. Whichever way that it happened, it was because it was a webcomic and because enough people tuned in that now it's a physical. Speaking of that selection of genres, in schools now, you don't see novels the way that we used to see novels. It's almost all graphic novels. And it's everything under the sun. If you go into the library for kids, the graphic novel selection is massive. If you don't have ideas for what you want to do, go into the kids section, look at the graphic novels, pick something up, pick multiple things up, take them home, read them. Because this will give you so many ideas that are beyond the cookie cutter superhero stuff or even cookie cutter fantasy, cookie cutter sci-fi. You will have so many ideas just coming out of your skull that you won't be able to put the pen, pencil, or stylus down while creating. Literally, there's such a selection, but it's only because webcomics became such a huge thing. So we'll continue. A to Z Art said, to be fair, there's a long history of comics being distributed for free or cheap via zines. Gonna cut in here again. We do this for the love of the game, and I think zines have been a massive way, especially looking at some of them like ElfQuest. You look at how they were able to get a lot of these comics out there and continue making comics for years and years and years, own the rights to these things, and it's literally only because they were pushing them in front of people who wanted to read them. And you had to do that via zines or something else, right? So we're seeing a lot of that happen. So they continue. Comics have always been about counterculture. Although I agree that readers have become extremely entitled thanks to webcomics, and I fear many of them will never know how delightful it is to read a physical book with no ads. So there is kind of that, where there's going to be a lot of consumption that is just on the apps. They will never go buy a physical book, or if they do, it'll be limited selection. And of course, now in the world today, it's going to be a limited selection because of pricing, right? So some people might not go and get the physical book. But there's going to be a lot of people who go get a physical book, and they're going to be absolutely head over heels in love with what you're doing in the webcomic, and they want something physical, right? So like I said, is they buy that physical and they want you to sign it because they are in love, especially now that creators can kind of like interact directly. They are in love with the idea of being able to interact with you directly, talk about the characters, maybe even like see if they can get some story tidbits out of you before you actually put it in the comic. So there's that. So let's continue. So Dove Square Comics said, no. Edit. Sorry for the short answer, got interrupted. If industry pros can't look past the platform, venue, whatever you're publishing on, their advice is only relevant to the mainstream industry, which is true. You would not ask somebody who only worked on, say, Windows 95 how to fix Windows 11. They just wouldn't know. If the only thing they ever did was on something that was older or something that, was standard for something else, you wouldn't ask them about this other thing. It doesn't make sense, right? You wouldn't necessarily ask your plumber how to fix the electricity in your house, right? I know that's two different things, but that's kind of like what I'm going for. It's two kind of different things, delivery systems and everything. It does sound, and so Dove Square Comics said, it does sound like you're specifically describing mobile apps when you say webcomics, and smartphone apps are as unique a format as comic books. I'm going to come back to this because this is a huge pin for a couple other people, right? With the individual quirks that includes, but it doesn't devalue the medium any more than newspaper comic strips do. EJ Strunk or EJ's Trunk? I'm not sure which one it is, but they said, I don't think webcomics devalue comics any more than indie shows being released for free on YouTube devalue television, which is true. You're watching YouTube right now. And does that make you not want to watch a television show? No, you'll still watch television shows, and you'll expect something different from that than you would necessarily from a YouTube video. But you can watch movies on YouTube as well. You just know the delivery system is going to be slightly different for you here. They continue, granted, YouTube is more immediate direct payment wise. So they're talking about the revenue monetization part of it. But I feel like most people who do the whole webcomic thing as a full-time job have monetization figured out, whether that's through the platform or ads or Patreon or whatever. Plus the bonus of getting beginners interested in comics like others have mentioned. Luca Brico said, the only thing that matters is the quality of the art and story. And I'm going to jump in after I read this and put kind of a caveat on that. So whether it's viewed on paper or the screen is irrelevant. Plus, you can do both most of the time. So people will read it for free online, and if they like it, they can buy a physical copy. Only thing I dislike are those elongated panels on some webcomics that force you to scroll endlessly. I'm gonna come back to that as well. Let me actually get through a couple more of these, and then I'm gonna unload all of my thoughts. So Mr. Fuju said, I feel like webcomics feel cheap to read if you don't prefer Webtoon or Tapas to going to a comics shop. I think they are different worlds, but both have their markets and ways of generating revenue, which is true. They do. And then this person, I didn't have their name in here. I cropped it out. Like I said, don't send any hate or anything to anybody that's in this thread. Everybody has super valid opinions on everything that they're saying. They said, I don't know. I just personally think it's ass ugly. And they're talking about the vertical scrolling format. I'll actually comment on that in my little segue. Value aside, as a consumer reader, I'll never read something formatted like that. I've heard people say that all the time. So there is a very, very valid hatred for the vertical scrolling format. I've heard people say that all the time. And as an artist, I will never butcher and crop and smash my art into fitting that format. It's just crap to me. So I'm gonna kind of put my iPad down because I actually want to talk about a couple of these points. So the first point is going to be the monetization aspect. So we know, like Juice said, like a couple other people said, it's for the love of the game. Like, we make these because we absolutely love making comics, or we love drawing, or we love being creative, telling stories, right? I like to tell people that I'm not necessarily an artist or a writer or a musician. I've done all of these things. I've made money from all of these things. And it's not that I'm these things. I like to tell a story. In every single one of those aspects, I'm trying to tell a story. And so with the monetization aspect, there are ways to monetize what you're doing. And so previously I've talked about kind of like my Patreon. My Patreon at one point in time was a really good money earner for something else that I was doing. It was like music based. And I flipped it over to the webcomic, and it's not making nearly what it was making before or anything. But I think with something like Patreon and a webcomic, what you can do on there, and kind of what I've been kind of like angling towards doing, is you give people things early. You give them access early to your content. Say you publish once a month, right? You post all your pages on there early. So people get, to read the comic weeks and weeks early. You post work in progress stuff. You show them things like work in progress for covers, or you show them character portraits, or you show them like the messiness of you putting together an actual page before you ever show anybody else. This brings people into your world, right? Maybe you even tell them, you show them other backstory stuff. So I'm creating different languages in my world. And some of these languages are equivalents to languages in our world, right? And I'm putting together, the dictionary and how things function. And so one of the things that I'll be doing in the coming months is actually putting this dictionary on my Patreon. It won't ever go anywhere else. And so on my Patreon, you can literally look to see, oh, okay, so this is how, if Squid was actually doing this in the comic for this character, this is how they would talk. This is probably the sentence they would say. And it gives you an idea of how like people are kind of like living, moving, thinking in this world. It's part of the world building aspect. And I'll never put that anywhere else. That'll only be there. And then you can have things like you could live stream to show them you working on pages, and you can sit there and talk with your group of supporters. YouTube is good for that as well. You can lock people behind like a members thing, and you can live stream just to them, so people can join you and be like, okay, I feel like I'm part of this, right? Because I think that's part of what webcomics is. It's like I can go to a store and buy a comic book, but the chances of me being able to like meet that comic book creator right when I'm getting the comic or when I'm reading it, or knowing that I'll be able to sit with them and actually just sit and talk for a long extended period of time is very, very minimal. Now, I'm not saying that you can't with comic creators. I mean, obviously you can do that. A lot of them do, Twitch, or they live stream, or they have Twitter, like, or Threads or whatever. You can message people, but it's more of like, can you sit and just chill with them while they're sitting there drinking coffee or, a beverage of their choice or whatever. And they're literally putting together the panels in front of you that you're going to be reading in the next couple weeks. And you get to see it come to life. Like that's something that as a webcomic creator, you have that ability to give that intimate feel. And so that's something that you can kind of push, as a webcomic creator. I don't think that traditional comic book creators can push it as well, because if you're doing a traditional comic, you got to do all this, then you have to get it printed. So by the time the person gets the book, it's like, well, months and months past when they saw you actually doing the thing. You can still do it, but webcomics, because they are more immediate and they are released a little bit faster than traditional comics, it feels like you could do that on something like your Patreon. So that's something you could use for monetization. That's kind of like the route you can take. You can do YouTube. I do YouTube. My YouTube is not busting at the seams. I don't get a ton of views, but it's at least another way for me to show you guys, hey, here's my speed paints, here's my characters. I like to talk about, my webcomic and other people's comics and other things that people are doing, and like I said, I'll have, my friends listed below, like go check out their webcomics as well. It's like, I like to do this comic thing and like bring people together and talk about it. And if you put me on while you're drawing, even better, man. You're creating and I'm showing you things I created while we talk about being creative or weird stuff that we see at art fairs, like people using AI slop. Anyway, that wasn't part of this. So what I'm saying is there are ways to figure out monetization for this, but it is one of those things like you have to have the audience, right? So I know for me a little bit, and I know for Juice that we have previous audiences from things we did before. With the music thing, I was able to bring a lot of people over because I was like, hey, I'm working on a webcomic now, and they know that I do stories through other mediums. They saw the stories I was doing through music, trading cards, and all these other things that I had with, alongside my music. And so they were like, oh, okay, this is cool. Webcomic. I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna check this out. So that was kind of like, something that helped there. I know Juice is doing kind of the same thing with Scrap, that most people now know him for Scrap, but music has been one of the ways that, me and him got together, and then other people have known him. They're checking out the comic book because of that. So those are other things that we're kind of like pulling in to have people kind of check our stuff out, right? And beyond that, just how do you kind of format your webcomic? So we had the critiques on the vertical format scroll. I will say I don't hate it, but it is not my favorite delivery system. I very much like how on Global Comics they actually give you tools where you can put boxes around the panels. And it's not even just boxes. You can actually make any shape, right? And you can put this around the panels so that when you're clicking next, it literally is jumping from panel to panel, and it moves however you wanted it to move in order. It is a very cool system. I like that because to me, it feels like when somebody puts a YouTube video together and they have the comic panels and they're talking over them, they have sound effects and stuff. It's like that. So I like that. But the vertical scroll is something that Webtoon is very much known for, and a lot of other places have started to kind of take that vertical scroll. And it makes sense because in the countries where it started, you're on mass transit, and you're probably on mass transit for hours during your day. You're sitting there one-handed, right? So this is how you're going to read everything. And so that's the easiest way to actually consume that kind of content. I will say that there is something inherently cool about vertical scrolling that traditional comics and the way that we consume comics and manga can't replicate. And I'm going to give you an example. And I cannot remember the comic. At this point, it's probably been like 3 or 4 years since I've seen this comic. But it was one of the first examples that I saw of this, and I was like, oh, that's cool. So the top of the episode, you would see the panel. And behind it, you would see this road. And it just kept winding and winding. And as you're scrolling down, there would be panels and bubbles and panels and bubbles. And the road was getting bigger and bigger. And by the bottom of the episode was the road and the people on it and whatever the resolution of that episode was. You can't replicate that in traditional comics. But it was cool to then go back and go, oh, that's how you did that. One of the other things was the horror comics. It was like the Korean horror comic, right? And the one where the chick's head like whips around and has the sound effects and everything. From what I understand, that was a scroll. And like it literally just really fast. And it was like some JavaScript. But you can't do that with like traditional comics. So there is a place for literally the vertical scroll. It has applications that you can't ever replicate somewhere else. You could do something on a vertical scroll where a character at the very top, and some people have done this with panels. I know that I've seen the panels where like two guys are squaring off and a dude reaches outside the panel and shoots down, and the other guy goes, you just wasted your last bullet, and then it's the last panel and the guy gets hit from the bullet that was 3 panels above him, and that's cool. But that's limited because you only have so much space on that page, right? Where vertical scroll, you could do something like a character jumps off a cliff at the very top of the episode, and then the rest of the episode is like whatever. And then the very bottom of the episode, they plunge, the sword into somebody's chest. And it's because they jumped off, and you're seeing like action lines. And you're like, I don't even know what those are for. Or maybe they build them into some of the panels, right? Some of the panels look like they're falling or something like that. There are different cool things that you can do with the vertical scroll that you can't do anywhere else. So that is something that webcomics are doing. Like Swords Comics said, that traditional comic is not doing, right? And so you can see that only in webcomics, right? I also think one of the things that we need to really think about when it comes to webcomics, and why I think saying that they devalue anything or people kind of sticking their nose up is weird, because comic book shops were having trouble bringing people in. Mostly they're saying, okay, I can be into comic books now. That's what webcomics is. That's how webcomics have become, especially for kids. Like I said, Scholastic book fairs are now showing tons and tons of different comics, different genres. Webcomics are now what the trading card tournaments were, 20 years ago, to get people to come into the comic book store. It's what like Smash Bros was to get people to come into, video game stores or comic book stores. It's another way for people to get into this medium that honestly, if you go to a place and there's a lot of selection, you don't know. And some people, you can ask them, but they're going to give you just like their personal recommendations, which I know, like you want to get personal recommendations, but sometimes people have recommendations when they're super into a certain thing that your average person that wouldn't be a good book for them to read, right? Or to start with. It'd be something that could turn them off from the entire medium. But now this is a way to get people into this thing. And just like, other people were saying this is like the newsstand. This is the way, like the old newsstand, you'd walk past it, you'd see a magazine or you'd see a book or something, and you would kind of like peruse. This is now how you peruse, because you're at home, you have a device that allows you to look on multiple sites. So now you're looking, you flip through it, you like the art, maybe you like the way a certain character looks, so you kind of want to know a little bit more about them, so you continue reading it. Then you see that the creator has posted some comments, because some of these places allow you to do comments. Global Comics allows you to have your creator profile, and you can just talk directly to everybody. Webtoons allows you to kind of like leave comments and everything in, the episodes themselves. And so you have a way to kind of like talk to other people, and people are like, oh, okay, so this is kind of their personality. I like what they're doing. And they get attached to you as a creator as opposed to just that webcomic. But because you're creating that webcomic, they keep coming back for more, And I think this is very telling in where the industry as a whole is headed. Because you see the big two are trying to figure out, how do we do this, right? How do we get people to read these things? And like Juice said, you're given, and Caanan even said, like, we're giving it away for free. How can we incentivize people? Well, it's almost like we incentivize people by giving them access to us in certain ways. So like with the Patreon idea, you go live, people can come in, talk to you, you post stuff only they can see, you give things away to them on that, where they're thinking, I'm getting this for free, even if they're paying like a tier or something. You show them behind the scenes. You show them your process. You maybe post private videos only they can see. Just these different ways to kind of get people to come and like you as a creator. Like, it starts with the comic, but they like you as a creator overall, to continue supporting all the stuff that you do. There are just multiple things that webcomics do above traditional comics that they kind of feed on each other. There's ways for you to incentivize people to get a printed version of a webcomic, and then vice versa. Like in the printed version, go, hey, the story's continuing on the website, it is boom. And people will now be like, okay, I need to know what happens next. And they immediately rush to your website and start reading because they need to know what happens next. So there are different ways to make things happen. I think it's really up to us what we utilize to make that happen for us. But overall, do I think we succinctly answered whether or not webcomics devalue comics in general? I think we answered that they don't. They add immense value, and they're going to only continue to add immense value. And I think over time, people are going to end up being more used to webcomics. I think people are still thinking webcomics are penny arcade style, where it's like 3 to 4 panels, and then it's or like Control-Alt-Delete, where it's like 3 or 4 panels lost. And it's, it's just like, here's a quick joke. I think a lot of people are still thinking it's that. Or they're thinking webcomics they have to be, my husband turned into a couch and now I have to feed him pizza at midnight on the 3rd weekend so that we can get married. And it's a 85 episode webcomic where all of the characters look like they were copied and pasted out of Clip Studio Paint, and they were just like an anime filter was slapped on them. Like, people still think webcomics are just that too. They're not. There's so many different things, and there's so many different ways to consume things, different genres, different art styles, and different, places you can read things. So Webtoons and Global Comics aren't the only two. Tapas isn't the only other one. There are so many different ones with so much offering out there that it's almost like at some point in time, webcomics might be the primary way that people consume comics. That's what I think. Anyway, that is all I have for today. I appreciate you guys watching this video. I appreciate Caanan for posting this and allowing me to actually do a topic on this video. Like I said, you can read his stuff down below. I'm going to put it in the description. Read Mia Kazina's stuff down below, Road Through University, and also check out the homie Juice Lee's Scrap. I'm going to have links down below. And then you can always check out my stuff down below as well. But I'm the prize winning squid. I appreciate you guys. Hopefully you guys like this topic. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit more. And I post every first and last Friday of every month. I forgot to say that in the intro, but that's when I post. So whatever you're doing, I think the last Friday is going to be, is it Halloween? If it is, we got to do something spooky. But with all that said, I appreciate you guys coming through. I appreciate you guys watching this. Let me know what you guys think of this topic. Let me know what your thoughts are. Post them in the comments. I'll respond. I love responding in the comments and all that good stuff. And also go check out this on Threads. If you have some responses in there, go check out everybody's stuff. That's who's in the thread talking. Tons of comic creators with really good opinions and all that good stuff. Anyway, I'm out of here. If I don't see you again, have a good life. If I do see you again, whether it is within a month, a day, a year, whenever, have a good life. Have a good time. Be safe. Always. I will see you guys next time. I love you. Thank you.